Get ready to embark on an exhilarating journey into the world of real estate with the fascinating tale of the Millionaire Hedgepath. Strap in as you learn the ins and outs of real estate from the ground up and discover the secrets of how to become a real estate mogul just like Hedgepath. With Hedgepath as your guide, you'll learn how to negotiate prices like a pro, read the thoughts of tenants and sellers, and choose the perfect real estate investment to maximize your profits. You'll discover the tips and tricks for meeting customers and overcoming their fears, and how to build your real estate empire from scratch. But that's not all. Along the way, you'll be treated to exciting stories of Hedgepath's own experiences in the real estate game, from buying and flipping properties to negotiating with tough-minded sellers. You'll also hear about the thrilling highs and gut-wrenching lows of Hedgepath's real estate career, including tales of heart-pounding deals that made him a fortune and nail-biting moments where everything hung in the balance. So come join us on this thrilling ride and discover the secrets to success in the exciting world of real estate with Hedgepath as your guide. Born in Maclouf, a farming community of 700, Hedgepath had no father to guide him. His father left home when he was a child. His mother, who remarried when he was in high school, worked as a government secretary. She raised him along with his 3 sisters while they all shared his grandmother's 3-bedroom, 1-bath home. When I was smaller, we struggled. We never went hungry and we never had dirty clothes. But there were no vacations, movies, or restaurants. One thing, though, that his mother emphasized to her children was that there were other ways to live, particularly with his sisters. He said she often stressed the importance of looking for men with higher incomes. From the get-go, I always knew I wanted to do something I enjoyed and something I made money at, he said. No one in Hedgepath's family was in real estate, nor was there anyone, other than his mother, who inspired him to succeed. He happened to notice, though, that most of the wealthier people around had been involved in real estate at some time. Often, he added, he heard people around town saying that they wished they would have bought real estate years ago. He took those words to heart. As Hedgepath grew up, he developed an interest in saving money. He chuckles at the thought of how he surprised his mother when she asked what he would like for his 10th birthday. His response, not a bicycle or a toy, as a typical 10-year-old might have answered, but a savings bond. Unlike many who have succeeded financially, Hedgepath does not consider school or education an overriding factor in his success. Perhaps it's because he had been a below-average student. I didn't apply myself, he admitted. I was into being a troublemaker. I was more interested in having a good time. In fact, he remembers taking a field trip one time with the student council. For some reason, the whole group of us were late getting back to school. The punishment, the students were required to start copying the dictionary. Hedgepath said he refused and was suspended for 3 days as a result. His refusal, he confided, was because he really didn't want to be in school in the first place. His mother, he says, spoiled a good time by calling the school and insisting that he be readmitted. Hedgepath often worked 15 to 20 hours a week while in school so that he would have extra spending money. Initially, he mowed lawns. He remembers working at a gas station, cleaning up slaughtered cows at a butcher house, housekeeping in a nursing home, and working as a cook in a fast food restaurant. He saved enough money to buy a car when he was 16, old enough to drive. It wasn't exactly a shiny new Corvette designed to impress, he stressed. I would get a car that would get me by and save the rest. On graduating high school, he took the brazen step of buying his first house in his hometown of Maclouf for $512,500 and over his mother's objections. It wasn't hard, he says. Maclouf was such a small town that if something was for sale, everyone knew it. Hedgepath bought a 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath fixer-upper. The people who were living there when I bought it had gotten a job transfer. I went to the bank for a loan and sold a motorcycle to get a down payment of $1,000 to $1,500. Hedgepath was confident he could generate a positive cash flow. He worked his fingers to the bone during every spare minute for at least a month during the heat of the summer on that first house. People kept coming by and asking what he was doing. He painted and made repairs. Then he put a sign out front to rent it. I rented it for $275 a month, which was pretty high compared with the value of the house. Although he sold the house after 8 years for $32,000 in 1995, he managed refinancing it at least 2 or 3 times before its sale. It paid for itself. Despite his distaste for school, Hedgepath found he enjoyed business subjects and did especially well in business law. Wanting to learn more about real estate, he often borrowed books on the subject from the library. Although he doesn't recall any specific books that influenced him, He says that titles were along the lines of how I turned $1,000 into $1 million. It was not uncommon for him to read a single book as many as 3 times to make certain he absorbed the information. Johnson County Community College, where he paid for himself through a student loan before dropping out, provided him the most important connection of his life, the contact that helped him realize his dream of success in real estate. Hedgepath had befriended one of his business professors, who doubled as a builder. Hedgepath approached the professor about a job and began work for him on construction projects. I would pick up after the carpenters and paint or mow the lawn. He found the whole real estate process interesting. Occasionally, he did work at the professor's mansion. It was the nicest home I had ever seen. Today, he admits, it wouldn't have turned my head. The job put him closer to his dream of being in real estate. He worked hard at his menial chores, and his efforts drew favorable comments from neighbors. The professor owned an apartment complex that was just 4 or 5 years old, but he was the type that had too much going on, Hedgepath said. He'd open his briefcase and paperwork would fall out. He would always lose his keys. He was juggling careers as a builder, professor, and an owner of rental property. Meanwhile, he had a family. It was all just too much for one person. The complex the professor owned was a 40-unit building in Olive, a suburb of Kansas City. Hedgepath, who had built up a friendship with the professor, talked him into letting him live there and run the property himself. The agreement was that Hedgepath could have an apartment and earn a couple $100 a month for running the building. It was a newer building but hadn't had any attention. Tenants were tearing it apart. Nobody was paying rent. The rents weren't as high as they should have been. Some of the apartments had too many people living in them. Hedgepath started out by serving eviction notices. I don't think I even went to an attorney. As he recalls, he simply went to the courthouse and picked up an eviction package that was available with forms to fill out. Because the building was relatively new, it didn't need major improvements. Hedgepath painted, did cleanup work, and exterminated that building, which he managed for about 2 years, even after it was sold to new owners, gave him invaluable experience in managing property. It was through managing the building that Hedgepath learned valuable lessons on getting along with tenants. Among the most important, express interest in the tenants. If a tenant had a plumbing problem, perhaps no hot water, and the complaint came in on a Friday night, Hedgepath learned to handle the situation very delicately. Getting a plumber on Saturday when plumbers charge overtime would cost extra, so Hedgepath would immediately call the tenant back, express sympathy and concern, and promise that the plumber would be there on Monday, when rates reverted to standard prices. Avoiding a Saturday job, yet calling immediately, saved on the building's bottom line yet showed Hedgepath was a caring manager quick to respond. After buying his first home in McLouth, Hedgepath bought a duplex, giving him a total of 3 rental properties. Then the purchases snowballed. As he amassed his real estate holdings, each purchase was made with an important goal in mind. Hedgepath not only tried to buy the property with no out-of-pocket money, but he actually tried to finance his deals and still come out with cash in his own pocket. Anytime you buy an apartment building, he notes, there is an opportunity to come out of the deal with money, including credit for a tenant's deposit, taxes, and deferred maintenance. Plus, he says, on larger projects he tries to get the seller to carry back a mortgage. The more cash he emerges with and the more liberal the terms he can get, the more cash he has on hand for his next deal, which may be just around the corner. Although he considered taking courses on buying property with no money down, Hedgepath decided that reading and hands-on experience already had taught him more than he likely could learn elsewhere. He recalls that one professor in a night class made each student stand up and tell the class what each was doing and why he or she was taking the course. The professor was so impressed with Hedgepath's real estate success that he sat back and remarked that Hedgepath should be teaching. Hedgepath was particularly proud of a deal he did on a 7-unit building in Lawrence, a college town 30 miles west of Kansas City. The guy had it for sale and was losing it in foreclosure because he wasn't giving the house enough attention. He said, nearly half the units were vacant and many of the others had tenants who weren't paying rent. It was listed through a real estate company. I paid $69,000. The owner had been buying it on a contract for a deed from the original seller, who was foreclosing. I took over the balance from the original seller. The real estate company needed a 7% commission. Hedgepath convinced the realtor not to take it in cash, but to let him pay it over the next 7 months. Meanwhile, Hedgepath came out of the deal with extra cash from deposits, rent, and taxes in addition to several $1,000s for deferred maintenance on the building. Total $3,000 to $4,000. Not only was the house in a great location, walking distance to campus, but the house he bought for $69,000 was appraised at $180,000 some 5 years later. Instead of selling it, he used the property to borrow against. It's tax-free money when you do that, he said. Hedgepath acknowledged it was tough going when he was starting out. He didn't have much money. If he got involved in a huge renovation project, he wasn't getting income from it because it was being remodeled. A lot I tried to do myself. A lot of times, I had no idea what I was doing. On the other hand, he also had little to lose. Luck and a good real estate market played a hand in the positive results, he admits. One rueful note emerged in his real estate career though. He owned 3 to 4 other properties at the time and was threatened with court action. The property never was foreclosed on because Hedgepath was successful in negotiating with the mortgagee. It was kind of an embarrassing time in my life, he said. The bills for utilities and rent were coming, and there just wasn't enough income to cover them. Nevertheless, he says if he could go back and erase the experience, he wouldn't. The experience taught him he could bounce back no matter what. It also taught him a key to financial success that he continued to use despite contrary financial planning advice. I'll stick with what I know. From then on, he was determined to stick with owning real estate and residential properties. Besides avoiding use of his own money, Hedgepath had some other unconventional strategies to get where he is today. For one thing, when he was starting out in real estate, he never used a real estate agent. I would look for a drive-by property for sale. I'd look for a house that was in disrepair with cars on the front lawn and broken windows. This told me the person needed to sell. Then he would call the county to find out who owned the property, and he'd either call or write a letter to the owner. If I had easy access to the owner's phone, I'd call to introduce myself and say I noticed your house at such and such an address and was wondering if you want to sell it. He'd specifically target the homes with the cars and refrigerators in the front yard, staying clear of the nicer homes on the block. Sure, the houses needed repairs, but Hedgepath was unafraid. Occasionally, if he thought an inspector could help him in the negotiations, he'd hire one and pick his or her brains in the process. Eventually, he learned how to spot problems on his own. A wall in the basement with a big horizontal crack down the middle was a sure sign of a foundation problem. I've never known a problem that couldn't be remedied. Hedgepath says he has sold only 3 or 4 properties in his life. He still rarely uses an agent, nor has he had any liquidity problems, which are typical of owning real estate. He admits, though, that a couple properties lack a positive cash flow. But cash flow is not always the most important factor when it comes to real estate, he stresses. There are other ways investors are making money. You're building up equity every month. You get a tax break. Inflation is increasing the value of your property. Hedgepath says he now can look at a property and immediately run the numbers through his head. He figures he can buy a 4-bedroom house across from a campus and dramatically increase rental income by putting in a dishwasher for $500 or $600, or by spending $400 to $600 on a washer and dryer, or paying another $100 for ceiling fans. Other factors that allow you to collect more rent, he notes, are central air conditioning and the landscaping in front of the house. For the majority of the property he wished to sell, he merely would stick a for sale sign in the front lawn and sell it for top dollar within a month. He says he is able to do that because he buys his property in prime locations. I wouldn't buy a property that was in a very distressed area. I wouldn't want to deal with the type of tenants such an area might tend to attract. I wouldn't be attracted to a building that had a bad foundation. I wouldn't buy a building where I wouldn't live myself next to a railroad track. For a large building, he looks at the rent roll and projects what he can have it up to in another 12 months. Then he subtracts the mortgage, insurance, taxes, utilities, and the cost of a maintenance person and manager. And now, on occasion, he does use a real estate agent to buy some larger properties. Another key to Hedgepath's success is negotiation. Hedgepath is careful to shun a suit and tie for important negotiations. Right now, I have on a pair of shorts and tennis shoes. Even though I may be looking at a $1 million deal, I want them to think it's just little ol' me. It puts us on more of a personal level. The sellers might relax a little hit more. They don't think they're going up against someone tough trying to squeeze them and get every last concession. He follows that rule, whether he's negotiating with one of his own property managers, a seller, or a contractor. Another rule of thumb, never be the person to mention the first price. Instead, always get the other person to say what he or she needs. I always try to find out exactly what the other person needs, not what they want. I never give anything more than what they need. Hedgepath also tries to find out exactly what a seller is going to do with the money he gives them. It tells me what I need to come up with. If he's selling because he's getting married and the bride doesn't like rental property, it tells me he doesn't need money at closing and might be willing to carry a second mortgage. If he tells me he's getting foreclosed on by a bank, that tells me I can contact the bank and maybe take over the second mortgage. Or if a seller says that he or she is a couple of months behind on payments and the bank is urging the seller to get rid of the property, Hedgepath might suggest that the seller provide him a name so he can contact the bank directly. Perhaps he could have the seller contact the bank to notify it that he has a strong buyer. The bank might be more willing to come up with favorable financing. Hedgepath says he never deals with a person who doesn't have to sell a building. Instead, he seeks out people that he knows he is doing a favor by buying the building at a reduced cost. Learning a seller's motivation is critical. If a seller is going to pay a real estate agent, I can pay the real estate agent myself over time. I can negotiate with the agent and get that reduced down. Hedgepath doesn't necessarily need to give extra money to the seller to do the job. Now, he admits, he doesn't knock herself out paying realtors overtime or negotiating lower commissions because he doesn't have to. But when he was starting out, these strategies were valuable ways to increase the cash he had on hand to save for his next deal. Hedgepath is a firm believer in periodically writing down his goals. It helps me to know where I'm at and where I want to be. When I started, I had the goal of buying 2 properties a year. His goal to make $1 million in 5 years was firm and in writing. Right now, he says, a personal goal is to get to the gym daily, and he is in a buy mode property-wise. Hedgepath also is firm with his tenants, another factor that distinguishes him from other landlords. He doesn't screen tenants but has managers who do that. But when anyone owes him money, he does whatever he can to collect, no matter how small the amount. His property managers know that they at least must send a letter or make a phone call to collect from the tenant. While most landlords are apt to ignore a broken lease, Hedgepath maintains it's well worth a 33-cent stamp and perhaps a few phone calls, no matter how small the amount, to claim what's owed him. Hedgepath, perhaps based on his own experience, does not give much credit to formal education for his financial success. If I had a kid, I wouldn't stress that on him, he said. I don't think it's really been a major factor. Certainly, there's tons of stuff I don't know, but for the business I'm in, I feel like I know a lot. Whether a formal education is worthwhile, he believes, largely depends on a person's goal. If the goal is to be a teacher or doctor, education is a necessity. In Hedgepath's case, though, it wasn't. For the career I chose, I didn't need an education. In fact, Hedgepath doesn't even have a real estate license. Hedgepath warns anyone considering a formal higher education to weigh the pros and cons carefully. You're going to be spending 4 to 6 years in class, he says. There's a good chance you'll be out of the workforce and losing potential income for those years. Add that to the money you're spending or borrowing to obtain your education. Then ask yourself how worthwhile it is. When people my age were in school, I was out making money, he says. It was kind of a compounded advantage. It's not that Hedgepath didn't learn anything. For what he does, it's important to know a little about everything: finances, negotiating, taxes, advertising, painting. Sometimes you have to be a psychiatrist to your tenants. He learned largely through reading and hands-on experience. In his new house, Hedgepath has 2 big-screen television sets. There is a hot tub and pond with rocks. French doors open onto the patio, and his office lies just off the living room. Much of his work is handled by 3 property managers and 4 maintenance people. In screening property managers, he looks for someone with a friendly appearance who can get new tenants in and make current tenants happy. I don't look for someone who has experience, because I like to train managers myself. When a newspaper article in 1997 christened him a millionaire, about half a dozen strangers approached him for money, and there was a little ribbing from his family. Hedgepath says that once in a while, either at tax time or when he's working on a financial statement, he'll say to himself, "Hey Dell, you've done good." But apart from that, he doesn't think much about the money. If he needs something, he buys it. Maybe people expect more of me, he says. They might expect me to pull up in a fancy car, or they might be looking at my watch to see what brand it is. I try to turn that around to be a positive. Often, Hedgepath said, people mistakenly assume the reason he is doing so well is the result of help from his parents. For me, that definitely was not the case. He clearly sees a major difference between people who have earned money and people who have inherited their wealth. There's a huge difference from the way they spend the money to their work habits, even in their overall happiness. The people who made money are so much happier with themselves. They're not necessarily out to prove or impress anyone. People who get money from their parents, he says, are out there trying to buy friends a little bit. and he believes lottery winners tend to take cruises and buy fancy cars and houses. Hedgepath says he took advantage of the Kansas City Star's free offer to have a financial planner look over his holdings because it cost him nothing. Before I met him, I had no idea what he was going to suggest. When he heard the outcome, I just didn't want to part with money to put in stocks. I wanted to keep it and still do my little game.